As the war in Ukraine escalates, concerns are raised over wheat supplies in the Arab world. Houthi militia launches a campaign to confiscate properties and assets of political opponents. Government forces inflict heavy losses on Houthi militia in Taz. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Shaza Abdelbey. The Security Council expanded the arms embargo in Yemen to include the terrorist Houthi militia as a whole. The Security Council held a meeting on Yemen today, and the Security Council approved on the proposal submitted by the UAE to impose an arms embargo on the terrorist Houthi militia as a whole. The Council approved the decision after 11 votes approved it, while the remaining 4 Council members refused. The Security Council resolution expands the arms embargo imposed by the UN on a number of Houthi leaders to include the entire group. With the war in Ukraine escalating, the UN's World Food Programme warned that the conflict between Russia and Ukraine will increase fuel and food prices in the Arab world and will push more people into hunger. This report has more details.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine may result in less food on the table in Egypt, Lebanon, Tunisia, Yemen, and other Arab countries where millions already struggle to make ends meet. Moscow's invasion has prompted a global increase in grain prices, which has impacted wheat-producing nations, raising concerns about serious ramifications for importing countries, particularly Arab countries who rely on Russian and Ukrainian wheat. Yemen, where millions are already on the brink of famine, are among the countries that are threatened by the rise in grain prices. The invasion pushed the wheat price far above its previous record high in European trading to €344 a ton last Thursday. Russia is the world's top wheat exporter and Ukraine is the 4th, according to estimates by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. According to research by the Middle East Institute in Washington, Ukraine sells 95% of its grain through the Black Sea, and more than 50% of its wheat exports went to the Middle East and North Africa. The MENA region relies heavily on wheat supplies from the two nations that are now at conflict, and any scarcity of essential commodities might spark instability. According to reports, it is estimated that Yemen imports about 20% of their wheat supply from Russia and Ukraine, Lebanon and Libya about 40%, and Egypt about 80%. According to UN Food and Agriculture Organization statistics, the United Arab Emirates and the Sultanate of Oman are the top Gulf nations purchasing wheat from Russia and Ukraine, and they would be severely impacted by the Russian war in Ukraine. Russia's military actions against Ukraine, which began on Thursday, February 24th, are still underway, despite strong international condemnation of Moscow. Yemen, where many families consider bread to be a luxury, is unfortunately hanging onto the edge of famine.
The Houthi rebels' control of Hodeidah port west of Yemen has exacerbated the humanitarian crisis in the country because the port is the only gate for aid's entry. The rebels as well continue to loot the humanitarian assistance that is meant to reach the most vulnerable Yemenis. This report has more details.
Since the war began 8 years ago, it has become normal to describe the situation as the largest humanitarian crisis in the world. It is also the worst international response to a humanitarian crisis, as international organizations have failed to ensure aid reaches Yemenis in need. There has been massive imbalances in the relief process. Most of the Yemeni population is under the control of armed Houthis, who seize humanitarian aid before it reaches those for which it's intended. Further, weak government institutions impede the travel and movement of relief workers. Relief operations must be reassessed and held accountable to ensure that aid is not wasted. Maisa Shuja al-Din, fellow at Sana'a Center for Strategic Studies, urged the Security Council to address the crisis through establishing and funding a coordinating mechanism for the delivery of humanitarian aid, alleviating the financial isolation of Yemeni banks, ensuring delivery of COVID-19 vaccines to all parts of the country, and stopping the supply of weapons to warring parties. The amounts of money that allocated, whether from the international community or regional organizations, is huge, reaching $2.1 billion last year. If you compare these amounts of money to the situation of Yemenis, you will find a large gap. Based on the views of random sectors from 5 governorates, relief does not reach many Yemenis. It's taken by Houthis who do not hand over any part of it to the non-followers. When we look back at the details of the crisis, we find out that 80% of the aids reached Houthis from the international organizations through El Hodeidah port, at a time when the governorates suffer from a major famine. The Houthi militia have been tampering with available humanitarian aid, selling it on the black market and distributing the products among themselves and their families. Dozens of men, women, elders, and children trapped in the Houthi-controlled areas in Yemen are on the verge of death due to famine and absence of humanitarian aid. At the end of the day, the best relief for Yemenis is ending the war.
The crimes of the Houthi militia against Yemenis are increasing. They have started a campaign to loot citizens' properties, especially those of political opponents. This report has more details.
The seizure of opponents' homes is a tactic the Houthis have used since they seized control of much of the country in 2014 coup, with more than 2,000 looting of properties till this day. The Houthi militia's continuous crimes have reached looting homes of citizens and seizing properties of their opponents in Sana'a and other areas under their control. The ongoing campaign by the Houthis of attacking the homes of their opponents came as part of their strategy to intimidate and terrorize poor civilians in Yemen. Human rights activists said that the Houthis seized his house, looted its contents, took everything he owned, blew it up, then subsequently seized and confiscated his law firm. Such behaviors condemned the Houthi militia and put the group under the table of accusation in front of the whole world. The thing that has driven Yemeni citizens to appeal to UN Special Envoy Martin Griffiths to intervene quickly to stop the militia's looting and confiscating of their own property and undermining all aspects of life. A statement issued by Yemen's Parliament and Shura Council said these actions are violating the international law, especially the Geneva Conventions and the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. An economist also stated that the seizure of the homes and commercial properties of opponents is aimed at exerting pressure on them and their families to prevent them from combating against the militia, and it also enables the Houthis to hoard money and property, enriching the militia's leaders at the expense of their opponents. The Houthi militia didn't contend to seizure of homes and companies, but they have also taken control over radio stations, and they have further shut down 6 radio stations in the capital Sana'a due to broadcasters' refusal to air Houthi propaganda. What will happen next is still uncertain, but it is expected to remain the same as long as the world is not moving to protect Yemeni civilians from the militia's continuous abuse.
More than 25 Houthi militants were killed in clashes with government forces north of Taiz. Sources said violent clashes took place after stopping an infiltration attempt by the Houthi militia in Al Arba'in fronts north of the city. Earlier, the Houthi militia intensified its attacks on the villages of Maqbana and residential neighborhoods in the city center, which led to the injury of 3 citizens and damage to buildings and property. Still in Taiz, military sources said the government forces targeted a vehicle and 2 crews belonging to the Houthi militia northeast of Taiz. The government forces managed to stop an infiltration attempt by the Houthi militia, leaving a number of Houthis dead and injured. In turn, the Houthi militia targeted residential homes in the same area with artillery shells, causing material damage without any human losses. Clashes took place between the government forces and the Houthi militia in Al Jawf. At the same time, the fighters of the Arab coalition carried out a series of raids targeting the positions, movements, and reinforcements of the Houthi militia in the same area. In the same context, the media centers said the artillery of their units destroyed the gatherings and mechanisms of Iranian Houthi militia north of Al Jawf, causing them losses in equipment and lives. In Ma'rib, government forces managed to stop an attack by the Houthi militia on the southern front. A field source stated that the government forces repelled a violent Houthi attack on Ma'la'a and Rish fronts in Harib district. The sources explained that during the attack, the militia tried to recapture some of its sites, but it had lost in recent period, but it received a great defeat. The Houthi militia launched a missile attack on residential villages south of Ma'rib, northeastern Yemen. According to sources, the Houthi bombing caused damage to citizens' homes but did not cause any casualties. The coalition carried out 11 airstrikes against the Houthi militia in Hajjah. The air raids resulted in the destruction of 8 military vehicles belonging to the Houthi rebels and the killing and injury of dozens of Houthi militants. The coalition intensified airstrikes during the past few days on the militia's sites and fortifications and reinforcements of various fronts of Hajjah and inflicted heavy losses on them. Coming next, Million signature campaign in Taz calls for improving electricity services in the city.
راتب الواحد 120 ألف والكيس الدقيق ب18 ألف والكيس السكر اليوم ب20 ألف. كم يعني بيعطي هذا الراتب كامل كيس سكر وكيس دقيق؟
المواطن اليمني يعيش في أزمة إنسانية وغذائية مؤلمة من غلاء الأسعار وفحشة الأسعار وغلاء الصرف والعملة الأجنبية في البلد.
حالتي الحين حالة لما خرج لما ندفنا شلقينا ما نقدرش ناكل الأكل داخل ما إحنا بحاجة صعبة.
Welcome back. Displaced people in Yemen continue to suffer as the conflict escalates. With more than 4 million people displaced, the country is gasping to provide life necessities. The UN has announced that many aid agencies would suspend their programs in Yemen due to acute funding crisis. This report has more details.
The United Nations announced that the conflict in Yemen has displaced more than 23,000 people in the country since the beginning of this year. The spokesman for the Secretary General of the United Nations expressed his concern about the dangerous situation in Yemen, which causes civilian casualties on a daily basis. United Nations spokesman outlined that more than 4 million men, women and children have been displaced across Yemen since escalation in 2015, warning that severe shortages of funding threatens the flow of humanitarian aid to these individuals. During the past 5 months, United Nations data revealed that the Houthi escalation is causing the displacement of 12,000 Yemenis every month, noting that about 62,000 people have been displaced within 5 months. The Houthi militia has confiscated the homes and properties of people after their owners abandoned them and fled to areas under the control of the militia in search for living. In the city of Urayda, west of Yemen, the militia has sold the homes of the displaced people after they were forced out of them. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees said Yemen has currently the 4th largest number of internally displaced people worldwide due to the conflict. In its latest update for January 2022, the Commission added that more than 150,000 individuals were forcibly displaced last year. It added that Yemen remains one of the largest humanitarian crises in the world, and some 20 million Yemenis, or about 66% of the total population, are depending on urgent humanitarian assistance for their survival. The United Nations agency highlighted that about 80% of the displaced are women and children. 2.6 million IDPs suffer from severe food insecurity, and 80% of Yemenis live below the poverty line. According to the agency, more than 1.6 million IDPs live in 2,200 sites across Yemen, and only half of them are supported by humanitarian aid. Indeed, the internally displaced people in Yemen face many challenges, including the loss of livelihoods and urgent need for food, water and shelter, and are vulnerable to epidemics, food insecurity, and malnutrition. Families living in displacement camps are exposed to constant threats of eviction and harassment. They also face difficulties in accessing clean water, basic medical care, and education.
Most areas in Taiz are witnessing chaos after the Brotherhood group seized control in some areas. This turned Taiz into a group for widespread killing for civilians and looting of lands.
Today, we're standing in support of the oppressed to achieve justice, order and law. We hope that we will mount on all obstacles in light of the vigilance of the concerned security bodies. We work to circle those violating law and order in the city. We will help authorities in confronting corruptions and those who want to destabilize the city. We will be more vigilant to any violations of security that do not go in conformity with religion, tradition or national principles.
In Taiz, people launched a 1 million signature campaign to demand the return of public electricity services. The campaign called upon the concerned bodies to link the city through the state-owned grid. This report has more details.
Millions of citizens are looking for light in the time of darkness, and access to electricity became an attainable dream. However, in light of the electricity crisis which the country suffers from, 6 people will be owed by the city one day, and abusers of private electrical companies would stop. In Taiz, the methods of refusal to blackmail and exploit private electrical companies are escalating until they reached the announcement of the Mega Million campaign.
We started the campaign because electricity now is paid at high prices. 1 unit is sold for 800 riyal, which adds to the burdens of citizens.
The campaign was launched to collect 1 million signatures, with the aim of restoring government electricity in Taiz, which was deprived of electricity 7 years ago, as a result of the ongoing war that shattered all the features of the city. The field landing team of the Great Million campaign demanded the restoration of government electricity, and they are devoted to continuing the campaign until the number of signatures reached more than 100,000 signatures within days. The issue that confirmed the evidence of their aspirations that the Million campaign would constitute popular pressure on the government to respond to their demands.
We've signed millions of signatures till now. Why the government keeps ignoring us? Electricity is one of the main means of life. It's added to hospitals to serve the patients. How come electricity prices keep rising?
The government electricity in Taiz was out of service for years, which made it the most requested issue and kept citizens in desperate need as a result of the healthy bombing and internal looting it was exposed to. And the popular rejection is growing in Taiz, demanding the return of government electricity, as if the Million campaign screams for government electricity, and citizens keep telling the government, our demand is to save us from blackmail and exploitation conducted by private electrical companies.
In Taiz, the Association of Mothers of Abductees held the first meeting to discuss the community's part in confronting violations and kidnappings. At the meeting, which was attended by a number of judges, activists, and previously abducted individuals, papers were presented as part of an initiative to raise awareness about the Houthis' human rights violations.
The goal of this initiative is to support the cause of the abductees. This issue is underrepresented in the international community, and there's hardly any outside support pulling towards this cause, despite monumental efforts on the parts of protesting mothers.
Here's a reminder of the main headlines. As the war in Ukraine escalates, concerns are raised over wheat supplies in the Arab world. Houthi militia launches a campaign to confiscate properties and assets of political opponents. Government forces inflict heavy losses on Houthi militia in Taiz. This is the end of the news. Thank you for watching.